In 1654, 23 Sephardic Jews arrived in New Amsterdam and incorporated She'erit Israel, the very first shul in what would become the United States. They didn't know it at the time, but they were laying the foundation for a community that would come to number 7.5 million strong. As Jewish immigration surged in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Jewish culture exploded alongside it. Jewish newspapers, Yiddish theater, summer bungalow colonies, and eventually, Jewish voices shaping Hollywood and American comedy itself. Over time, what started as Jewish culture for Jews filtered into the broader American consciousness. But something interesting has been happening more recently. If the 20th century was about Jewish culture going mainstream, the 21st century has seen an explosion of religious Jewish culture, especially within the Orthodox world. Music, food, vacations, weddings, publishing, entire ecosystems have grown more sophisticated, more invisible, and more influential than ever before. Sure, these things existed in earlier generations, but the scale and intensity today are something new. And that's what this podcast is about. If you're listening, you're probably like me. Someone who consumes this culture, lives inside it, but is also deeply curious about it. Not just what exists, but why and how it exists. What drives it, how it shapes us, and what it says about Orthodox Jewish life in America right now. On this podcast, we hope to speak with musicians, authors, podcasters, and creators of all kinds to explore modern Orthodox culture from the inside, thoughtfully, practically, and honestly. Welcome to Frum But Relatable. Okay, Channah, thank you so much for coming on, for being the very special first guest of this podcast. Channah Cohen, who is my guest today, is an adult educator for the OU's Emerging Career Professionals and Yavneh Young Professionals. Previously, she worked for the OU Center for Communal Research as the applied researcher on their large-scale study of Singlehood and the Shidduch Crisis. Channah has a master's in adult learning and leadership from Teachers College, Columbia University, and is the author of the historical fiction novel Guardians of the Flame, which is what we are mostly going to be discussing today. So, Channah, thank you very much for coming on.
Thanks, Barak. I'm so excited to be here.
Excellent. So I'm going to start maybe before the book itself. I know the book came out last year, if I believe correctly.
Yeah.
But well before that, just to get to know you a little bit better, and maybe some, not always is what someone did in their childhood a direct correlation to what happens in adulthood. But I'd like, if you don't mind sharing a little bit more about your background, your upbringing, and anything that you think from the past that maybe is relevant to the book that you ended up publishing.
Yeah, that's a great question, which I'm going to answer both honestly and also obviously leaving some of the gory details to people who actually know me. But yeah, I would say that in my childhood, it's a weird thing for me to say, but again, Barak, like happily you and I know each other, so I'm going to be honest with you also, which is that stories of heroes for me in my childhood, I think had a disproportionately positive influence on my self-development. In as much as what I mean by that is that very frequently, I felt the most kind of validated and understood and relatable to some of these characters that I would encounter. Mostly it's Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings. I was like a total nerdo. Star Wars a little bit too, but just these classic hero narratives that are about the development of usually someone who's around my age. When I was a teenager at the time, I was going through a lot of hardships at the time, which was really about grief and loss, and just being able to have a main character whose own emotional development, whose own struggles socially, emotionally, mentally, in their own reality was something that I felt like I could relate to, was something that I really felt helped me keep my head above water and inspired me to always be seeking the good with a capital G, in a way that I think was really a really meaningful and significant part of my development as a human being. But I would also say that at the time, I had no idea that was the case. Like, that's my read of it as a 30-something-year-old adult. At the time, they were just stories, and I just loved them. And there was something that they spoke to me, and they had me feel comfortable and inspired me. And only as an adult, I was like, could back read the meaning that they also played in my life and development.
Got it. No, that makes sense, and that's cool. Can you draw that out a little bit more? I want to hear more again, because this I think relates a lot to your book. But on what that meant to have these heroes, it kept you. You said, right, it kept you above water. So can you pull that a little bit more. It was people that you felt were relatable characters to you, right? If they can do it, I can do it also. It's just, hey, these are really cool people, and it's an inspiration. Like, what exactly about having these heroes? What did it for you?
Yeah, I'm gonna answer a little bit more in depth. I think sometimes that happens. We like talking. I talk sometimes in these like larger terms without telling the full story. So I think that like the full story, if I'm talking about the book that I wrote, which is about the Hanukkah story, and I think that this was a huge thing, also that I only really understood as an adult, which is that there are so many heroes who are part of Jewish history and who are part of our daily experience of life as a Jewish person. And I think that almost the most classic heroes that we encounter in the Jewish lexicon are the Maccabim. Right? Anyone in Tanakh is sort of like, we sort of could touch them, we sort of can't touch them. Could we understand David? Could we understand Moshe? We're not really sure, right? But once you get to like the Second Temple period, the Maccabim, like everybody's like, this feels so good to talk about this story. It's the light in the dark. It's the good guys vanquish the bad guys. It's a little band of people who love their homeland and love their God and love their people, fighting the bad guys who are trying to impose their way of life onto the good guys, right? Like it hits so many of these ways that we think that hero stories should be told. But since we're so familiar with it, sometimes we don't look at it that way. We're so familiar with the story of Hanukkah and the good guys beat the bad guys and Al Hanisim and the many over the few over the many, etc., that we don't think about the personal story of the real people who went through this. But stories about real people are always the stories that survive the test of time. And that is not only me who says that or who believes that, but really I think my whole understanding of the significance of the stories we tell to ourselves and to each other as human beings came from Joseph Campbell, who has had a huge impact on my life. Joseph Campbell was a mythologist who studied, it's a cool job. I don't know any kid who grows up and says like, I want to be a mythologist when I grow up, but like, it's a darn cool job. I sort of wish I knew about it when I was growing up and going to college and grad school. But he studied the myths of cultures around the world. He went around the world and he asked himself, what are the stories that these different cultures tell to themselves? And then how are they similar to each other? What are the things that link all of these great stories that have lasted the test of time in the Chinese culture and the Middle Eastern culture and the American culture and the European culture and the blah, 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 right? Like what are and again, much, much more specific than that too. What are the things that link all of these together? And from that, he talked about the story of the hero's journey. And he kind of mapped 4 stages, which really could break up into 17 stages, that he says you find these in all cultures. And the reason you find them in all cultures is because it's actually the story of every human being. It's the story that speaks to each of us about ourselves. We see ourselves in those stories. And those are the stories that last throughout time. And you can map it almost exactly onto Lord of the Rings and onto Harry Potter and onto Star Wars. They're all these stories of the essential hero. And those are the things that really spoke to me when I was a kid. I feel like I know a lot of people who love superheroes, right? Like that's really what inspires them, are like these superheroes. I know a few people I'm close to the family who's very into Batman. Batman is like an inspirational, very real story. It's not like a cute, ridiculous movie that they watch every once in a while or comic books that they read and then throw in the garbage. Like it means something to them because it's a story that speaks to who they are. And not to jump the gun, I'm not sure if you were going here or not yet, right? But I think that sometimes we miss the chance in Judaism to find those people, to find those heroes, because we want our heroes to be unrelatable and on a pedestal like those figures in Tanakh, and even like the rabbis. Like, as I'm sure you know, there's like a whole argument about Gedolim books, right? Are Gedolim books helpful for our development or unhelpful for our development? And in a certain way, we don't want to look at these people like Harry Potter and like Frodo Baggins and Samwise Gamgee and Luke Skywalker and other people who have to have an internal battle with themselves. We don't want to see the rabbis as having a battle with themselves, but because of that, all of our heroes in Judaism sometimes are unrelatable and on a pedestal, and we have to go to Batman and we have to go to Frodo and Sam and Harry Potter, and I have no issue with that. But what I do have an issue with is that, like, what about our own heroes? Why are we missing them? It's totally fine to have Frodo and Sam and Batman, but What about our own? What about Yehuda HaMaccabee? What about the people who fought with Yehuda HaMaccabee? What about David and Moshe Rabbeinu? Like, what about our own heroes? And what about the stories that we could tell ourselves about these heroes that would inspire us and help shine light on our own journeys as human beings in our own lives? And that's really what I've found has spoken to me so much. It was something that, again, in my childhood, that's what helped guide me. I was guided by the heroes being guided by their guides and their stories. I was guided by these hero narratives that sound familiar and sound similar to things that I felt like I was struggling with in my own way. And it's not just me. That's why Harry Potter is famous. That's why Star Wars and Lord of the Rings hit off and are still alive nowadays, decades later, is because they speak to us. And and that's a very powerful experience for a human being to experience through media, through books, through movies, through podcasts, is feeling like the stories that we tell ourselves have meaning for me as a human being.
Right. I think it's funny because I think absolutely true. It happens to be the only one of those epics that I'm personally familiar with is Harry Potter, but big fan. But I think what you say about the Judaism is such a good point. I've started thinking about it a lot more this way as well. That when we can kind of, again, you do have to be a little bit careful, but to some degree we make, and at least we understand that these are work, and we experience these characters, or these people, as what they were, which is real people. It actually, I think it doesn't take away, it actually makes it more inspiring, not to derail this at all, but just to very quickly. I say this with like Chazal, and I think there's probably an approach that the Tanaim, the Amoraim just had Ruach HaKodesh, and that's how they did everything. And that's fine. But I think it's a lot more inspirational to say that, no, they had to fight to keep the Torah alive, right? There was persecution. They had to make decisions. It wasn't, I believe that they had a divine inspiration, but to say that everything was black and white because of the Ruach HaKodesh, I think it's more, it was the spirit that kept them, pushing and understanding how important and critical and real this was to fight to keep it alive, to keep the Gemara, to create the Mishnah, create the Gemara. I think that actually makes it a lot more inspirational than perhaps the other way.
Yeah, I totally agree. I'm actually giving a chabura right now, like a weekly chabura, about the stories that Chazal tell about themselves. The stories, going in historical order from the start of the Second Temple period, that Chazal tell about Shimon HaTzadik and Tigran Socha and Yossi ben Yoezer and Yossi ben Yochai, right? Like going in order and saying, like, what are the stories that we're told about these people? Because again, Chazal don't really care about being historically accurate, but they very much do care about telling us stories. That's what they want. There's a moral embedded in all of the stories that they tell, and being able to look at those stories and say, what are they trying to teach us? That's what stories are always about. They're not trying to teach us history. They're trying to teach us something about our development as a human being. And those are the stories. Again, that's Hanukkah too. That's the holidays too. And I get it. And I'm kind of scared of like going into the Tanakh period. But you go into Hanukkah, this is like a beautiful hero narrative about the good guys versus the bad guys, about the underdog who wins with for freedom and for justice and for love of their fellow beings. Like it's incredible. And like, let's tell it as a story. Right. One of my biggest, one of the things that I'm most like proud of probably in my life right now, not to make like a blanket statement like that, is that I have a 5-year-old son who is very much a boy. And I'm so proud that when I ask him, like, who's your hero? Like, who's a hero that you look up to and you want to be like? He answers Yehuda HaMaccabee. And I love that he does that. I'm so proud of that. Like, I love that we have at least a few books that tell, again, a pretty historically inaccurate picture, but they have these great, like, it's a great hero narrative. We have a few about David HaMelech. We have a few about Yehuda HaMaccabee. And we should tell these stories like they're hero narratives because that's what they are. And that's what I was really trying to do with my book. I was trying to say, this is such a clear hero narrative that we don't tell as a hero narrative. We tell it as if it's a historical event that we're celebrating, which it is a historical event that we're celebrating, and it's a story. And let's hear it as a story. What would it have felt like to live during this time period? What would it felt like to fight alongside Yehuda HaMaccabee and really be unsure what the result of those battles are going to be? It's a big argument. Like, did Yehuda HaMaccabee fight assuming he was going to win? Which is, again, kind of like what you were saying, right? Did Chazal all have Ruach HaKodesh? Like, Yehuda HaMaccabee, like, it wasn't really a high-stakes battle for him. He had Emunah. He knew that God was going to fight with him. He just, like, showed up, he fought, and then he left and went home. Or did he fight assuming he was going to be totally slaughtered? Because this is the Greek army, and in what reality does he win? But someone has to fight. Someone has to do something to defend the people and to try and to give God some hands by which he can wreak miracles upon his world. Or like, which one? What was Yehuda Maccabee's attitude? What were the attitude of the people who fought with Yehuda Maccabee? What did it feel like to be a hero at that time?
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And the hero thing, I want to jump a little bit next. So that's a lot of the background. Let's get a little bit closer to the book itself. The adult event, the events maybe more immediate that preceded your decision to I want to sit and write this. And I'm going to speak to you have this unbelievable video that I love. It was from I think it's from your fundraising pitch. And I don't want to spoil it, but whatever. I mentioned a little bit about Batman versus Yehuda Maccabee. I don't want to spoil the video, but can you just maybe use that as the base, but kind of build around what immediately as an adult, what kind of snowballed, and you're like, I'm writing this book.
Right. Yeah, I do. I love that, and I love that you're referencing that. It was certainly a challenge, and again, we might get into this or we might not, but like it's pretty expensive to write a Frum book, so I knew that I wasn't going to be able to afford it myself. So I had to fundraise from everyone I knew who I thought might support something like this. So I made a fundraising video for the fundraising website, which really in 3 to 5 minutes, I had to tell the story of why I wanted this to be something that people would shell out money to support. Like, why does it matter? Who cares if this book gets written or not? And that was definitely a challenge for me to try to figure out how to articulate. And I told it encapsulated in a story, which is a true story. It really happened. And obviously the build up, it was like a little bit more nuanced, but the story of what happened was that I had begun writing, honestly. I had begun writing earlier, and I had begun writing just a random hero narrative, just for fun as a hobby, not having any idea of where it was going to go, honestly. I started by writing about Robin Hood. I was like, cool, he's a hero. Like, let's do that. Good versus evil, like the poor versus the rich. Like, it's good. It checks out. And I just started writing for fun. And then there was one time where we'd eaten lunch by a friend's house. I was in the backyard watching a bunch of kids. Most of them were boys. And they were all like playing around a slide. There was a slide in the middle, and the kid at the top of the slide, his name was Yehuda. He was around 5 or 6 years old. And Yehuda was clearly the leader of this like little gang of mostly kids who were younger than him, so 4 and 5-year-olds. And Yehuda said very assertively to the kids on the bottom, here's the game we're playing. You guys are all the bad guys, and I am Batman. And I remember thinking, like, in my head, like, dude, your name is Yehuda. Like, why was your sentence not, you're the bad guys and I'm Yehuda HaMaccabee? Again, I have nothing against Batman. A few people called me out in that video and were like, you're anti-Batman. I'm like, guys, I swear I'm not anti-Batman. I'm actually very pro-Batman. Like, this is actually my point, right? My point is that Batman is great. You know why? Because that little Yehuda on the slide doesn't know a blessed thing about Batman. But somehow it logs in his, like, ancient, archaic human brain that there are bad guys and he's a good guy. And I love that. And who's the first person that he thought of when he thought of, I want to be on the good guy side? All my little friends are going to be the bad guys. I'm going to be the good guy. And who's the first good guy who came to his mind? It was Batman. And again, it wasn't like they were like a bunch of from families in Silver Spring where I live. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think this kid had more exposure to Batman than he had to Yehuda HaMaccabee. But Batman was the classic hero in his mind. And to me, that was when I was like, again, I want my kid, who I don't even know if he was born at the time. I guess he was like probably a baby at the time. I want my kid when he's 5 to stand at the top of the slide and be able to say and believe, you guys are the bad guys. I'm Yehuda HaMaccabee. Because there's something like, why aren't we telling our own stories to ourselves? Joseph Campbell, when he's mapping out the hero's journey into 17 steps, some of those steps are named after pieces of the Bible. Like, one of the steps is called In the Belly of the Whale. Right? Those are biblical references. The Bible, our Bible, the Old Testament, the Tanakh, is the greatest story that humans have ever told themselves, to ourselves, about ourselves. And sometimes we're scared to look there. And that's what I want to not be scared of. Like, I wanted to be able to provide for my sons. I have 3 sons. I have 1 daughter. I'm happy that she reads it too. Again, I was such a sucker for these things when I was a teenage girl growing up. Like, I loved male heroic figures. There are many female heroic figures that should also be featured. And let's tell those stories. Let's start telling those stories. I also, like, part of the inspiration. So again, like when I saw that happen on the top of the slide, that's when I was like, forget about Robin Hood. I'm writing about Yehuda HaMaccabee. Like I want to give that kid Yehuda HaMaccabee back. He's Yehuda. Let him have Yehuda HaMaccabee instead of Batman's great and Batman. Guys, I love Batman. I know his birthday is on February 19th. I'm proving it. Okay. I like Batman. Okay. But another thing that really also struck me was my oldest son during COVID was around 8 or 9 during COVID. And he also, being bored out of his mind in general, was listening to like random podcasts called like kid short stories, which are like between 5 and 10 minutes about shtus, shtus, okay, like total inanity. And me and my husband were getting driven a little bit insane. We're like listening to the stories because like he's playing them around the house, and we're like, they're so at some point my husband said to me, like, what is with these stories? Like, why is he listening to them? And I was like, Jeff, he likes them because every single story is about a good guy versus a bad guy, and the good guy wins. They're all stupidity. The rest of it has no plot line, but it's always good versus bad, and the good wins. And that's a really like our 8 and 9 year old son wants to. He could relate to that. Like that speaks to him. Good versus bad. I'm on the side of the good guy. I could relate to the good guy, and good wins out at the end of the day. It's a beautiful, beautiful piece of our humanity. And we in Frum culture have to learn how to tell those stories that we have been given by Chazal, by history, by Tanakh, by God. Like Joseph Campbell tells our stories for us. Let's tell our stories to ourselves.
Right, we should know our own stories. It's a very good joke, which I'm going to butcher now because I don't know the exact way to say it. But basically, you have a couple of yeshiva guys. They're learning all day, and their Rebbe says, guy's doing a good job, but you should try opening a Tanakh. Well, just once, just try it. Gemara is great. And they open it up, and they're going through it, and the two verses, they're going through it, and then they read, some from the beginning, some from the middle. And okay, and they go to lunch, and one of their friends asked them how was morning Seder, and like, oh, we actually opened the Tanakh today. And because I recommended it, and the kid who hadn't learned with them, he said, "Oh, so how'd it go?" And the guy said, "It's actually really interesting. It was really interesting." And the kid's like, "Oh, really? Like, what's it about?" He's like, "We're not 100% sure what it is yet, but it's got some really great quotes from the Gemara in it." So right, like you said, we should know our own stories. So you mentioned your kids, but and full disclosure, I still have to go through the entire book. But who would you say, right now, once you actually went through it, is your primary audience for it?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, as I was writing this book, I kept it a secret for a long time, honestly, because I was just like so weirded out that I was writing it and was very nervous about whether or not everyone would look at me and be like, "You're a weirdo," which again, Barak, you and I have spoken about the imposter syndrome before, right? Like it was very nerve-wracking to start this totally new thing and not be sure how the world around me would receive it. So anyways, the point is like I kept it under wraps for quite a while that I was doing this, even though I was like really passionate about it. And my husband and I were eating a meal at someone's house, and we started talking about Harry Potter. Again, my oldest son at the time was 8 or 9-ish. I was reading him Harry Potter. He loved it. I loved it. And this was like a much more yeshivish family in the community. And their oldest son was around 18. And we mentioned something about Harry Potter, and the family said to us, we don't let our children read Harry Potter. So, but they love to read. And so we looked at them and we were like, so what do they read? And at that point, the 18-year-old boy like looked at his mom, and she was like, it's really hard. And he was like, all Frum literature is for girls. That's what he said. I was like, my jaw dropped because I was like, oh my gosh, I hear that. I hear it. There's a lot of literature that is written either in a way that is not necessarily interesting for boys, or that is directly targeted towards girls, or that is sort of written towards boys, but very rarely is the protagonist himself a boy. A lot of times the protagonists are adults. So I think that is just this gap that I was really also trying to fill. Like what Harry Potter did for me, which it does for girls and boys, right? Which is give you a character who's the main character that you could resonate with as a developing mind, and also that's really enjoyable for adults. So that's like what I really wanted. Like I wanted to target like 13 to 17, like really directly, especially boys. And I want adults to love reading it, and I want girls to read it. And secretly, once I could write this again here, like a lot of the protagonists are male / like basically all the protagonists are male, because I really was trying to hit at the male audience and get the like approval and then start adding in like a bunch of strong female characters and see what happens next. Which is like, again, for a project for a different time. But at least here, I again, I'm in Silver Spring, and the Yeshiva of Greater Washington is now doing it as a book in eighth grade. Like they have it as part of their curriculum
That's
because
amazing. That's
yeah,
amazing.
it's so
Wow.
cool. Yeah,
That's
it's
really
super
cool.
cool. Thank you. Yeah, it's super cool. I'm really happy with it. Last year they had a different book that was whatever. It just didn't go over well. It didn't feel like it was a book that spoke to boys about the things that they're interested in. And here, again, this like the hero narrative here, it's like there's a lot of wars, there's a lot of war strategy, there's a lot of intense other individual themes, like a person finding himself and being able to be himself and feel like he's useful in a group dynamic, right? All of just like those normal human themes that are beautiful when you read about them in the life of a real person that always speaks to us. And then the backdrop is historically accurate. I was obsessed with it being historically accurate. There's not a ton of historical figures from the time period that we know about, but definitely the five Hashmonaei brothers plus Matisyahu and all the Greek generals and Antiochus, right? Like all the Greek generals at the time. Everybody who's a real historical figure is at the place that they were at the time doing the things that we know them to have been doing at those times. Like the backdrop is historically accurate. And I was really passionate about that. I want to be able to like, what if you could show up in Harry Potter and know that Harry, Hermione, and Ron are fictional characters, but like Dumbledore was real and Voldemort was real, and this is what Hogwarts felt like, and this is what London felt like at the time. That's what I wanted. I wanted that you could step in, you could feel like the main characters, again, who are the ones who are going through the struggle. Like, far be it for me to put that struggle in Yehuda al-Maccabee's shoes, but you could put it in a fictional character's shoes, and those fictional characters were real because there were real people who fought with Yehuda al-Maccabee. So what would it have felt like to be one of those real people, really living in the time, really encountering Yehuda al-Maccabee, really being beside him when he really fought the wars that he really fought, and seeing the outcomes that really happened? Like, what would that have felt like to you being a real person at that time? Again, being a real teenage boy at the time. Was really the question that I asked myself, to be able to both carve this out for the audience and carve out a story that, again, spoke to Joseph Campbell's heroes. This is what all heroes feel like and sound like when you get to know them, because this is what we feel like and sound like when we get to know ourselves.
Right. Yeah, and there's a lot of good stuff I wouldn't going to use a word that I hate, but I abhor now. But a lot to unpack there. It's one of those corporate buzzwords that I can't stand. But the truth is, there is. And one thing that I do definitely, right, the fact that you wrote a book, right, you're an author, you have skill at writing, is literature something that you also specifically feel? Again, you had that good story that you mentioned about the Shabbos meal that you shared, that there's really a lack there, and then that's a role that you felt like there's a place that you felt like we could definitely fill in there.
Yeah. Yeah. This was maybe this is a spoiler alert for you, Barak, but you asked me over text message, you were like, can you think of a bunch of books, some books that are from literature, books that you would recommend that you really like, that speak to you? And the answer to that, I'm like a little bashed to say, is like, no, not really. I mean, I read Rav Hirsch and I read Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, and I read a lot of like psychology, modern psychology books, and I read a lot of primary sources, and I read a lot of history books. And like, I wish that there were stories, again, especially historical fiction, real stories. Again, I love history, because I feel like it's the real lessons that real humans learned through hard experiences. And so I like it. On the other hand, I like Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings, so apparently I like fantasy too. And I wish that there were stories that didn't feel canned, corny, superficial, or something. Like, I wish there were stories that
Were real.
I wanted to read. Yeah. And that
Right.
spoke to me and felt like they were not preaching at me, but that they were allowing me to experience the human journey alongside someone else, which is what those other stories felt like. And I really haven't encountered that. And again, I love primary sources. I love going through Chazal and saying, like, why is Chazal telling us this story about whoever, Yossi ben Yoezer? Like, I love reading Josephus. Josephus is probably the closest storybook, which is a
Right.
history book. Yeah, a history book. But Josephus is an ancient historian, which is glorious because he wasn't trying to spell out the facts. He was trying to tell it as a story. And I love reading Josephus, because he tells us the story of Herod and Miriam, the last Hasmonean princess, and the drama in their relationship. Like, it's great stuff. Then you cross-reference that with the stories of Hillel and Shammai, which are happening at the same time, and you're like, wait, Hillel and Shammai lived at the same time as Herod? Like, seriously, right? Like, when the Korban bias happened, and Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai and his two students, Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yoshua, are the ones who sneak him out, and everyone else thinks he dies, and his nephew is a double agent. Like, the stories that Chazal tell, if you think of them as stories, are like way, way more interesting than any fantasy that I've ever read. But we don't tell those stories. We're scared to tell them, but I don't even think that we're scared to tell them. I think we don't think of them as stories. But these are like the treasures that Chazal left for us are these stories that they decided we should continue to tell ourselves. And sometimes where they diverge from history is the most fascinating. Because what Chazal is telling us is like, we don't want you to look at history. We want you to look at the way we're telling the story and to learn something moral about it. And we don't really care if, again, history went down in this similar way, or like, the story is something else. It's a qualitative speaking to the human soul and human development in a way that raw history doesn't.
Right.
And let's tell those stories.
Yeah, I have two follow-up questions. They're kind of distinct questions, but I'm going to ask them together because I think you led into kind of both of the things that I was thinking about asking as a follow-up. Again, about kind of the missingness from literature. So the first question, again, we can answer them again, after you could repeat the questions. But the first is, and I'm not, right, full disclosure, I'm not in the yeshivish world. I'm definitely much more in the modern Orthodox world. But from your experience, do you feel that maybe something that's missing, or one of the reasons it's missing, is because maybe that there's this idea for boys that, like, why are you reading a book? Go learn more, and then there's something that, and maybe we're moving again as whatever, and the movement is towards, no, listen, right, the joke as a kid was always sports, right? Sports is always a joke, but whatever. That's what, that was the joke when I was in I was in some camps that sort of thread the needle, had some modern campers, had some maybe more yeshivish campers, and the joke was that the yeshivish kids were always so good at basketball because, like, what else are they going to do with their free time? So it's not a very nice joke, but is there truth? Is that part of the difficulty? And is there are those walls falling a little bit from what your vantage point? And there's a lot there, so I'll ask the second question after, and we can go with that one.
Yeah, I'm not going to pretend that I know all that much about boy culture. Again, I grew up in the Beis Yaakov light world, and then went to YU. So then I was in the modern Orthodox world. Like, so I sort of have experience in kind of both camps, but I've actually never grown up in the yeshivish boy world or the modern Orthodox boy world. That's not really part of my background. And I live in Silver Spring, and I'm from Chicago. So again, these kind of like out of towny, more open, less divisions in a really distinct way between like exact hashkafic breakdowns. And my oldest is a 12-year-old boy. So I don't have like a ton of experience that I can't really say, but I can say that, again, I do think that in places that, like you're saying, are trying to thread the needle between what they're exposing children to, what they're not exposing children to, what feels like it's good literature, what feels like it's actually useful literature. I think that this is a struggle. And also, let's call a spade, what is interesting literature? My son loves reading sports books. And now he's reading How to Train Your Dragon because I got it from the library, and I put it like, next to his shelf because I knew that was like, he was going to pick something up when he was done with the sports books that we got from the library. But again, like, what if I put a bunch of other kinds of books there? Like, what story books in Frum culture could I put there that would really, really be compelling to him, that would make him want to pick up the book, want to keep reading, and be not just a scintillating, exciting adventure in which everyone happens to be from, in which case it's not a Frum book and he may as well read How to Train Your Dragon. Again, this is not an anti-How to Train Your Dragon. I love that. Right? I love How to Train Your Dragon. But the question is, what are we offering that's different? If we're offering literature that sounds like How to Train Your Dragon, but it's not even as funny or well written, then I would rather him read How to Train Your Dragon. Just because the main character isn't named Yaakov, like, what do I care? But what could we offer that actually gives our boys something that they want, and girls, again, I'm not anti-girls, right? Like, gives our children something that they want to read that also has redeeming educational or self-development or some, again, educational in the broadest sense, meaning to them as people. I would like us to see us doing a little bit of a better job there. And part of it, Barak, is just like, it's really expensive to print literature. Like, it's just really expensive in the Jewish world to print something that that is only going to appeal to the Jewish world. And that I also like had a lot more sympathy when I had to raise a lot of money to be able to print this book that I was really passionate about, and I felt like was checking all these boxes because it was also historically accurate and also about a holiday and also for boys and also blah, 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 right, all this stuff, and it was still like hard to raise money and still really expensive. And I was like, okay, maybe this is part of the reason that we don't have great literature available is because it's really expensive to have anything available.
Right. It's definitely tough because yeah, it's a good point. And again, on the flip side, I think with maybe the more modern world, kind of like what you said, if maybe the challenge on one side is, getting, I don't want to call it the permission again. I don't want to speak for a world I'm not super into. I'm not super part of, I should say. But for sure on the modern side, it's like, listen, if the quality is not going to be great, we're willing to expand a little bit more. So we just won't have it. And it's like, all right, so like we're kind of caught in the middle. So it's definitely a tough space. Which actually kind of leads me also, this is just sort of again, I do want to get to some of maybe broader, your thoughts on some broader trends or whatever's the right word in the Frum book space. So do you think, I mean, I know this is a passion of yours, and again, I know from before, you've talked about here, right, history, so that makes it easy, but I have my own thoughts on this, and I'm curious to hear what you have to think about this, again, as a published author, is that part of the challenge is that it's hard to find a sweet spot. And I'll give an example. It's difficult to write, let's say, a compelling book set in modern times where one of two things don't happen, where you don't talk about topics that, again, I'm not faulting anyone, right? I understand why you wouldn't want to put more sensitive, like real sensitive taboo topics inside of a mass-produced quote-unquote book. Even if that makes it a lot more real, and the problem becomes then it often makes the characters feel less real. I remember I had a collection of Jewish shorts, like from short stories, again, one of the few as a kid, and I remember one of them, and I thought they were well written, I was like 7, 8, 9, something like that, but I remember one stuck out to me as being completely unrealistic, which was, there was one about a bully in camp becoming essentially, I mean, the arc itself was wonderful. But because it was a book for Frum children, right, the worst thing the bully did was like lightly make fun of somebody for like striking out,
Mm-hmm.
And like that's, to me, I'm like, unfortunately I've been in situations, I've been in Frum places where there unfortunately has been a kid who has not behaved nicely, and it's a lot worse than, but you can't paint, you want to be very careful about how you paint the Frum community inside of a fiction book. Mm-hmm. And on the flip side, I feel like you don't want to make every single villain a non-Jew. Because that's the other option, so to speak, if you want to have a real quote-unquote villain, if you don't want to attack the community at all. So then I feel like, and you can tell me what you think about this, is that almost historical fiction is actually our greatest area of opportunity for high-quality stories.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's fascinating what you say, because that was also, I felt like, again, being the first, basically I didn't want to get put in a chayrim, right? Like I wanted to write a historical fiction and not get my book put in a chayrim, although I heard that's great for sales. So maybe I should have tried to get put in a chayrim, but I also wanted to get printed. So it was a little hard to balance, right? But here, in a certain way, the hero in the Hanukkah story, the heroes are very heroic and the villains are very villainous. Like you said, the villains are the bad guys and the Jews are the good guys. And you always know that the Jews are going to be the good guys. And some of them are a little complicated, but like not super, super complicated. The super, super bad guys are all non-Jews, Greeks, who are trying to kill Jews. So it was pretty simple. And there are so many more stories. The truth is, the first story that I started writing, or one of the earlier editions before this became about Yehuda HaMaccabee, was that I was actually considering whether or not to write about the Churban Bias time, which to me is like the most fascinating time in Jewish history. I think there was so much at stake. I think the characters and the drama that we just know about from the Talmud is like mind-bogglingly fascinating. And the actual main characters, the Jewish characters at that time, are much more complicated. You have Jews fighting Jews, so what would that have felt like? What was the justification of either side? You had a lot of like Messiah and Hasmonean energy of like, God is never going to desert us in the temple as long as we're fighting in the temple, right? Like it's much more complicated. And then it felt like I wasn't going to be able to get that balance exactly right. And it's a lot safer to have the first book that I published, have the good guys be the Jews and the bad guys be the non-Jews, right? But again, Barak, like I hear what you're saying, like, Jewish history feels a little bit safer, perhaps, because we're working with a structure that's real. And so even the Churban Bias, which again, I, God willing, hope to write a book about it eventually, the Churban Bias and the complicated structure of Jew on Jew and how a lot of the issues that we faced and a lot of what we peg as sinas chinam that may or may not ever have really gone away from the Jewish people is that it's complicated Jews not understanding each other and fighting with each other. And the bad guys in that sense are Titus in a certain way, Vespasian even more questionably, and certainly the other Jews. So that's a lot more complicated. But listen, it's history, so I'm allowed to tell that story, and I love that. I had one of the Rebbeim that has had a big influence on my life is Rav Reuven Leuchter in Israel, and he at some point talking about literature said something that I thought was like really fascinating. And he said, like, it's really, really important for our boys. I think he was talking about boys' structures also, for our boys to learn literature, but really for our children to learn literature because of we have such harsh rules about Lashon Hara. We very frequently, in a good way, are allergic about talking about each other, about one another, and analyzing other people's decision making. Are they doing what's right? Are they doing what's wrong? Did their decision lead them to a better place, to a worse place? What happened with these real people that we really encounter in our lives? And we're trained almost really not to think of each other in that way. And he says literature is even more important when we're not talking about that, because you have to learn from somewhere about what's the right thing to do, what's the wrong thing to do, and what the natural consequences of different decisions are.
Excellent. Okay. Again, great points. So just for I think the last couple of things I want to ask you about is about maybe some practical questions about the broader publishing world. So you've talked about it a little bit, but can you detail for me how easy or difficult it was to get published, right? Again, like we said, it's not a huge space, the Frum literature. It exists and it's growing. It's not huge. So, was there a trail? Were there people or just institutions that were there to help you, or you went kind of flying blind on this whole thing?
Yeah, it was a lot of flying blind. It was hard. It was hard. I had a little write up of my manuscript. Again, I spoke to a few people in my community, one of whom worked in Frum Publishing. I have a friend in Frum Publishing, or in just not Frum Publishing, like just general Jewish book publishing. And there's like an author, a site, like a woman in the community who publishes secularly. So again, I kind of spoke to a lot of people, tried to decide if I wanted to print it within the Frum world or in the general secular world. Again, since I felt like I owed something to my target audience, I wanted to print it within the Frum world. And that's obviously a lot harder because it's a lot. Basically, how it works is that the author upfronts a lot of the costs. You'll tell me if this is like too detailed for you.
No, this is great. This is what I want to hear.
Yeah, the author upfronts a lot of the printing costs, but then gets a larger kickback on each sale. So if you end up selling a lot of books, it's great. And if you don't end up selling a lot of books, it's a great hobby that's very expensive. Just like, I don't know, liking cruises and world travel is really expensive. Just kidding. So that was like a hard choice. And then I also I didn't get accepted by everybody at first, which I think is like something that we all know might happen. But the first people who I submitted the book to, I spoke to a few people about who the best publishing house for this kind of thing might be, and they gave me a suggestion, and I wrote it to them, and they told me that in 4 weeks they would get back to me, and in literally exactly 4 weeks, I got like a form letter that was like clearly just like copy pasted, like sorry, and it was really disappointing. And then I ended up finding the publishing house that I worked with. It's called Adir Press, who I loved their little pitch on their website was like, are you an author who wrote a book and you literally have no idea what else to do and you don't really want to do anything else? Work with us. And we distribute through Feldheim. And I was like, that sounds up my alley. So they were a lot more hands-on about the whole process and helping me with editing and helping me with, formatting and stuff like that. So that was really helpful. And they distributed through Feldheim. So it got into all the Jewish bookstores, which is where I wanted it to be. And it was a really big project. And I'm still, again, I needed to fundraise for it. I didn't have that much extra funds. And people were really, really generous. Over like 200 people donated to the fund with that fundraising video that I'm happy that you also watched, Barak. And it was hard and it was great. It was a long process too, like between the writing and the actual, I think it took me around a year and a half to write the book. The book is close to 300 pages, I think, published. And it took me around a year and a half to write. And then there was around a year of me editing, going through, giving it to my own beta readers, having them look at it. I got a lot of advice that I should give the book to beta readers, meaning readers who are going to read it and give me the honest opinion of how it lands on them and people in their population. I had teenage boys read it. I had teenage girls read it. I had adult women. I had adult men read it. Like I really, and everybody had really, really helpful feedback that I integrated in some way or another into the book, which were big things like this strategy doesn't sound reasonable. I think you should rewrite the whole strategy. And like this scene, I know you love it, but you should take it out because it doesn't help your plot. to like, I think the sentence, you said it backwards, like, and, or like, this isn't really a word, is it? And all of that was like really, really, really helpful.
So it's a couple years, basically.
Takes the village. Yeah, it's
Wow.
a couple of years, and I didn't do it on my own. Like I really, really had help from a lot of people who were devoted to the project with me. And if I could be meta for a second, which I don't know if you really want, but it was a risk. Like I was 31, I think, when I started writing it, and I hadn't done anything like that before, and it felt really weird and risky to start doing something completely new, and then to ask people for real help. Like, can you really read this 300-page book and give me your real feedback? And then I would integrate it, and then I would give it back to them and had discussions with them. And people were so willing to show up and help and encourage it and be part of it. A young woman who I gave it to, I actually sent it to a friend to be a beta reader, and someone who I knew was at her house and read it, whatever. So like that young woman came back to me and she was like, Channah, it's really cool that you did this. And it's even cooler that the book is good. And that was like one of the best compliments that I got this whole time. And just being able to believe in myself that like, actually, like, it's not just weird that I did this. It's also weird that I did this, but it's also cool. And people might think that about whatever project you might have in mind. That you haven't tried because you're worried that maybe it's weird, and maybe it is weird, and maybe it's also cool, and maybe it'll be even more cool when it's good.
Right. Which is a good segue into, so again, this is a world that we said, right, is definitely can use more, but it is a challenging world to get into. So what would you, again, honest, right, you could say like, don't do it, but what would you say to people who, let's say, again, realistically, there's nobody, I assume there's, I don't know, nobody or very few people who this is a full-time job, writing from things, minus maybe, no, yeah, I'm sure there's nobody, or maybe a couple, I don't know, people are going to call me out, like, no, I know, whatever, but it's certainly a challenging space. So what would you say to somebody who's like, no, I have this idea, like, you know, like you said, there's definitely room, so it seems like they're definitely, the answer isn't going to be this is an oversaturated market,
right?
But what would you say if someone came to you and was like, hey, I saw you wrote this book, right, you wrote a Frum, novel, I kind of want to do the same thing. What would you say to somebody like that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say a few things have to be true. If you're independently wealthy and have a bunch of extra cash lying around and you want to do this as an expensive hobby, totally go for it. Otherwise, a few other things have to be true, which is that there has to be some other way that you can make this sustainable and beneficial to you in other ways. So for example, I am an educator. I'm a professional adult educator. So the fact that I wrote a history book is good for my general bio for what I have done in my life, right? The fact that I want to give classes and love teaching adults about any historical fact and any historical time period in Jewish history. And really, I love teaching any part of Torah, but again, especially those stories and especially Jewish history. So the fact that I wrote a book helps me also. It could help me get scholar in residence positions. It could help me get whatever, okay? The problem is, for me, I'm not a super entrepreneur. I really love being an educator, and I really don't like the advertising, entrepreneurial, self-promotional stuff. Someone who likes that would be in a way better position than me. Somebody who would have the know-how of social media and how to promote and how to advertise and have just like the guts and the gusto to do that. Then it totally could be more sustainable than I think what I'm experiencing right now. There's another author in the community who wrote not a novel, but like a Torah moral book, I would say. And part of his philosophy was that he wanted to use it to get scholar in residence positions, to get, speaker gigs in other ways also. So he was writing about something. You have to write about something that you're really passionate about, because again, it's a really long process. And if double checking the map that you had to learn how to create yourself against 6 maps in different books is not a fun thing for you to do, then don't do it, right? Like, it has to be something that's really intrinsically motivating for you. And then either if you're independently wealthy or as a joke, right? But basically, if you could use it in some way, then it totally could be sustainable. And especially if you're good at that kind of stuff, which I happen to not be. But people who are, they could really, really make it work. They could really promote it. They could really have it spread. They could really have it be part of their professional resume, the fact that they wrote this book and it's a part of them. And it could be done. It certainly could be done.
For sure. Okay, good. No, it's encouraging to any budding authors out there. So broadly speaking, as we sort of wrap up, right? You would hope, I guess, that going forward, I don't know what hope is, but you hope to see in for your youngest boy, right? That your goal would be that ideally, or hope, or whatever, that in a few years there would be 5 years from now there'd be a lot more out there. You want this field to expand. You think it's important.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the field of good quality literature, and again, everyone could say good quality literature. I think, and it means something different to every person. So for me, what that means, again, that's also why I think history is a great fallback option, is because if the backdrop is real, if it's talking about a real time in Jewish history, then it's already useful information, right? History is what is it? History that is not learned from is doomed to repeat itself, right? So anything that we could learn from history already has an educational value that's going to far surpass like random shtusy fantasy that's compelling, but that's all that it is. So when I say quality, I mean that it teaches us something about ourselves, either as individuals or as a people. And I think like that's how I gauge quality. Can individuals learn from this for their real lives? Is there something here that could speak to the developing soul, to the hero's journey that everybody is on? And as long as the answer to that is yes, like I'm happy for my kids to be reading that. And I do wish that we had more of that. I think, again, especially for boys. It sounds like, and again, I'm not an expert, it sounds like there's a little bit more for girls. But in general, again, I think we don't have a lot of hero narratives, and I wish we had more.
Yeah, for sure. There's a lot, there's a lot there. Before we go, last question is, where can people find your book? Again, Guardians of the Flame by Channah Cohen. And what are you doing next?
It's a great question. So they could find my book on Amazon or at Jewish bookstores. So that's, again, it was distributed by Feldheim. So it's in all the regular Jewish bookstores in your communities, the Zbermans and the Shabsis and the et cetera, and Hebrew bookstores in your different community. And it's on Amazon. So that's good. And it's on Feldheim's website and at Deer Press's website. And if you reach out to me personally, if you happen to know me, then I'll try to get you a good deal from the stockpile that I have in my basement that I'm allowed to sell for cheaper. So you definitely could reach out to me or find it at any regular places, at the Wayu's Farm Sale, places that you would expect to find Jewish books. What I'm doing next right now is, again, not professionally, but like extracurricular professionally. As you read in my bio a while ago, I was on the project having to do with the Shidduch Crisis, Singlehood and the Shidduch Crisis that the Center for Communal Research at the OU did a few years ago, and I'm really looking to expand that. I think that the development of young people has a lot to do with the situations that young adults in the Orthodox community then have to deal with. So the crossover there is something that's always interested in me, and that I'm sort of extracurricularly pursuing. And in terms of publishing, again, I keep bringing this up, but I really want to go to Churban Bias next. And if I'm super bored, I sort of want to teach myself how to do a graphic novel, because I see that that's really, really compelling for kids of all ages. All my kids like picking those up. First choice of whatever books are available to them. So part of me is like graphic novels about real history and hero narratives in the Jewish world. Like, that's super cool. And when I win the lottery, I'll do it. And when I don't win the lottery, I'll do it really slowly. And you can expect another fundraising page in your inbox, Barak.
Excellent. Looking forward to seeing all of that. Okay, all right. I don't know how to do this yet, but I will put the links in the show description. I know that's a thing that you say at the end of the podcast, so I'm going to say it, and then hopefully I'll figure out how to do it. Channah, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Again, everyone buy the book. It's great. And yeah, okay. Thank you so much, Channah. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
If you made it through the entire episode, thank you. Hopefully that means you enjoyed. If you did, then I'd really appreciate it if you'd leave a like, subscribe, and even share the podcast. Have any comments, feedback, or guest suggestions? I'd love to hear from you. So send all you have to say to frumbutrelatable@gmail.com. Again, that's frumbutrelatable@gmail.com. Thanks again for listening. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.